by a clown.
Killer clowns are something you see in horror movies, not in real life.
Not one thing was clear. It was all a mystery.
It was such a bizarre case that did grab everyone's attention, locally, nationally, internationally.
When someone gets murdered, you immediately look to a spouse.
Police still haven't found that piece of the puzzle.
This case grew colder by the day.
And just like that, they hit a wall.
They're never going to find out who did this.
In 2014, new DNA technology came back with a hit.
This was the news that people had been waiting for years.
This is still all about Marlene Warren. We want to do justice for her.
I saw the eyes, and the eyes don't lie. As far back as I can remember, my brother John, my real father, and my real mother, Marlene, we lived in Michigan. I was about 3, 4 years old. My father went to war. He came back and he just wasn't right. He couldn't get his life back to normal. He was drinking, doing all kinds of things that you're not supposed to do around kids. So my mom, Marlene, decided to leave my father and move to Florida. It had to be tough on her. She was making this big decision to be a single parent with 2 young boys. She wanted us to grow up proper, and she was dedicated to us. She was a beautiful woman. She was inside and out. I mean, I can't say enough about her. She was always loving and caring. She was inspiring. Months passed, and she met Mike Warren, and he seemed like a nice guy. He was charming, he was flattering, he said the right things at the right time. He'd go out his way to do something, for someone. He seemed real nice. He seemed real knowledgeable, just a nice guy. So they got married. My mom was content. We were striving as a family. Things were going pretty good. I mean, life was good.
Marlene was a great mom who took pride in everything that she did, and I think that was exemplified by the life that she lived. She was successful. Marlene owned properties. She was essentially a landlord, and her husband, Mike, repossessed cars. They were a busy family. From the outside, it looked like success.
Mike bought a piece of property out in the Aero Club in Wellington because he was flying airplanes.
The people who lived there parked their airplanes in the backyard. We're talking about wealthy people. You'd be lucky to live here. The American dream.
Wellington has this name for excellence, perfection, and it held its name for being a nice area to grow up in. It was something out of a fairy tale book. Everything was just immaculate. I can remember that day. It was around lunchtime. I was at work. My boss told me to go home. soon as my mother saw me, she started crying and said, "Your brother's dead. He died in a car accident." I don't know how to tell you, I'm just gonna tell you. And you know, I lost all energy in my body. I just went limp. You know, I just was in disbelief. We were just devastated. After my brother's death, my mom, she started reaching out, needing Mike more, and asking for him to be around. And he was not around when he was asked to be around. She asked him to hire someone and to do what he needs to do to be home. And 6 months later, it didn't happen. Nothing changed. He wasn't home. The same old stuff, just different day. Eventually, she started catching on that something was wrong. He'd come up with excuses. "I have to go do this, I have to do that, I have to repo cars." He had an excuse for everything as well. Excuse, not an answer. I remember that morning, my door opened up and I saw Mike's face look in. Nothing was said. He shut the door and left. You know, I had some friends over my house, and somewhere around 10 o'clock or so, we were eating our breakfast, and my friend Gene says, "Somebody's at the front door." We all look, and we can see the colors through the door. It looked like a person had some flowers. Gene was gonna go answer the door. My mom said, "No, sit down. Finish your breakfast, I'll go get the door." My mom went and answered the door. And we heard, "Oh, how pretty." And then I saw my mom fall to the ground. I looked down and saw that something was desperately wrong. I jumped up, I went to the front door, I looked out, and then I saw a clown. I was shocked. There was makeup on and it was colorful costume. I knew I needed to identify this person somehow. But it was impossible. I mean, the only thing I saw visible was the eyes. I saw big brown eyes. I couldn't say if it was a male or female. What really stuck out to me was the boots and the orange wig. I mean, I was trying to see whatever I could possibly see.
Joey Aarons and his girlfriend made their way to a car to be able to try to chase the clown.
The perpetrator drove off in a white LeBaron. I was so reckless, I could have killed us and someone else trying to get this car down. I never driven like that before in my life. Just running red lights, just...
I was the copy editor at the Palm Beach Post when the call came through that there was a shooting at a house in Wellington, and everyone rushed to the house. In the meantime, there were a couple neighbors who had heard gunshots. One was a doctor, and he and his neighbor rushed over and started treating Marlene.
I went back home and my mom was already in the ambulance. They told me they had her secure. She was okay. Detectives were there, roaming through the house, a cop in every corner in every room.
Police took photographs of everything. The blood stain in the entryway, the flowers that were still left behind, the balloons that were still left behind. Kind of right next to this pool of blood, very eerie, very sinister.
They individually interviewed the kids in the house, and each of their descriptions varied slightly. Most of them described that it was a white-faced clown with a red nose, so you had limited bits and pieces.
Usually you have a description of a male, female, but here was a clown who had dark eyes, and that's about it.
It's just so frustrating to not be able to give them any answers to go on. Looking back at it, not one thing was clear. It was all a mystery.
Breaking news, someone dressed as a clown shot a Wellington mother as she simply answered her front door.
When this happened, it shocked the entire community. And the search was on for this mysterious evil clown.
It was such a bizarre case that did grab everyone's attention, locally, nationally, internationally.
That shooter, a clown carrying flowers and balloons.
Marlene Warren had just answered her door, greeted by a clown.
And the whole specter of this person being dressed like a clown added this media frenzy about it.
Someone dressed as a clown came to the door with 2 balloons and a basket of flowers.
Clowns became very scary for people. There is something creepy about clowns. It was frightening.
Florida is known for kind of crazy crimes. And even by Florida standards, this one just blows it out of the water. Killer clowns are something you see on TV and in horror movies, not in real life.
She was on a respirator, a breathing machine. I stayed with her and I didn't get any response. No movement, no eye movement, nothing. I just prayed and, told her not to leave me. I needed her.
In the emergency room, Marlene Warren struggled to stay alive. The bullet had entered her mouth and traveled back to the spine, and it actually damaged her spinal cord and her ability to breathe on her own.
The first day was still a lot of hope. The second day, there was a lot of hope, but it started fading. On the third day, my grandmother said that, we're going to have to let her go. That was pretty hard. That was really hard. I could feel it in my heart and my soul just get ripped out of me. When I looked down at her and I knew my whole heart and my soul it left me.
Marlene suffered a gunshot wound to the head, and when she passed, the investigation changed from an attempted murder investigation to murder.
Marlene Warren died after being shot in the face by a clown who came to her door bearing flowers and balloons.
The detectives did ask Michael Warren if he had any ideas about who would have done this, what motive they might have had.
Michael, who apparently was rattled, told police that the person who committed this could have been perhaps a disgruntled tenant because Marlene was a landlord.
When the detectives spoke to all the people that knew Marlene Warren, to a man, to a person, everyone said nothing but the most glowing things about her.
We met tenants in the apartments that she managed who described her as more than a landlord, but a member of their families.
They couldn't find anybody that didn't like her or had any disagreement with her. So it pretty quickly became apparent that the only person that really had a motive was Michael Warren.
I think that people who were close to Marlene believed that Michael was having an affair, cheating on Marlene with one of his employees. The potential for a divorce would have been a devastating one financially for Michael. If Marlene had decided to leave that marriage because of what he was doing, she would have gotten the money. She would have gotten the properties because they were in her name.
You're listening to Mike Miller on We're talking about the death of Marlene Warren, the 26th of 1990. Somebody shot her wearing a clown outfit and left the home. Michael Warren with us. Mr. Warren, do you know anything about the shooting of your wife?
I do not know any more than what my son has told me at the time that he was at the house.
Do you suspect anyone in particular as being the person dressed in the clown that day who came to the house and killed your wife?
No, I really don't. It's been a tragic thing, and it's been like living in hell.
The investigators of this case had made no secret whatsoever in, if not formal allegations, certainly insinuations that Michael Warren was involved in the murder of his wife.
Well, I believe that if the sheriff's department can make accusations and comments without any proof or anything to back it up and bring me to trial by the media, I feel like I should say something that at least fight back.
Even though the motive for the killing seemed to be coming into view, there was nothing to tie Michael Warren directly to it. In law enforcement, when someone gets murdered, you immediately look to a spouse. But here you had Michael, who wasn't anywhere near the house at the time of the shooting. In fact, he was in a car with his friends on the way to a horse track. So he had an airtight alibi.
Soon after Marlene was shot, the police received a tip.
I'm afraid to say this. I think you just need to Sheila Keene, if you question.
A caller who said, check on Sheila Keene. Sheila Keene was a girl from the Glades. A lot of people knew her. She was a girl with long brown hair, these deep chocolate eyes. She worked with Michael repossessing cars. They were close, they did business together, and as time went on, their coworkers said that they were very affectionate with one another.
It became pretty apparent very quickly that Sheila Keene was very much involved with Michael Warren, and it was more than business.
Even by Florida standards, this case is bizarre. You have essentially the execution of a mother, not someone with mafia ties, not a woman with enemies, killed by a clown.
Although it was obvious to everyone that Michael was cheating on Marlene behind her back with Sheila Keene, there was no evidence that Michael participated in the murder. So police were focused now on Sheila Keene. They had the flowers and the balloons, and they went back and searched every local flower store to find out who sold these flowers and who sold the balloon.
Pretty quickly, detectives were able to locate a nearby Publix that in fact sold that very style of an arrangement.
When police went to the Publix, the employees who sold those balloons said that they remembered a tall woman with long brown hair buying them.
They next then were able to locate a nearby costume shop that was called Capizio. So they were able to speak to a couple of the ladies that worked at Spotlight Capizio who reported that on Thursday night, the 24th of May, that a female had come to the door after they were closed and was insistently knocking on the door to get them to open up.
They let her in. They described this woman as having long brown hair, brown eyes, kind of a mannish sort of mannerisms.
This was 2 days before the murder, and while inside, this woman asked for a clown costume and extra white makeup, but was not interested in buying shoes.
The clown who showed up at Marlene's door and pulled the trigger wasn't wearing clown shoes either. Joe and his friends said that the clown was wearing combat boots.
So detectives recognized immediately that Sheila Keene matched the description both of the ladies at the Publix and the ladies at Spotlight Capizio.
Police tell the employees to look through a police lineup for the person they sold that costume to, and Sheila's photo is in there. Neither is 100% sure that that's the woman who bought the costume.
Within about a week or two of the shooting, a white Chrysler LeBaron was reported to be abandoned in a nearby shopping center. So deputies responded, and when they find this white Chrysler LeBaron, which has the VIN number of a car, that had been reported stolen.
Not only was it stolen, it was stolen by Michael Warren's car lot.
Michael owned a company called A Bargain Motors, and their advertisements looked like a competitor car rental company called Payless. The clown drove away in a white Chrysler LeBaron. It was one that a couple had dropped off at A Bargain Motors, mistakenly believing that they were at Payless. Instead of correcting the problem and returning the car to Payless, Michael and his employees kept it.
They processed the car. There was a Publix plastic bag in the car and some fibers.
There are these reddish-orange fibers, consistent with what you might find in a clown wig. They also find long brown hair. Technology was not what it is today, and they weren't able to forensically analyze it.
The car itself didn't really lend evidentiary value except for the connection to Bargain Motors and Michael Warren.
Sheila Keene wasn't repo agent for Michael Warren. She was at the car lot a whole lot.
They brought Sheila Keene in for interviewing and asked her, where were you on May 26th?
You remember that far back Saturday morning where you were or what you were doing?
I got dressed, went to Waymont.
What time was it when you left your house?
I don't know, I'd say somewhere, 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock, something like that.
Did you find that car?
No,
Did you talk to anybody down there?
No.
Just drove by?
Yeah.
What kind of car were you looking for on point?
Oh, God. I don't know, I think it was a Datsun, Nissan, Toyota, something like that. I don't know.
You know the location, what street and point?
I think it's north something, 13th and 14th, I don't know.
She told police that at the time of the shooting, she was out repossessing cars, but she couldn't really give any kind of definitive address.
She was unable to provide them with a single person that she spoke to.
You couldn't have been driven by this passion because of this relationship that you and Michael. So,
There is no relationship, there is no passion.
She adamantly denied being in a romantic relationship with Michael Warren.
what would happen if that was your car?
I don't know how I got there because I wasn't in the car.
She claimed that her hair in the car could have come from anybody.
We're getting nowhere because I'm telling you I didn't do it. So whoever wants you to think that I done it, you need to find out who that person is.
She denied killing Marlene, and police didn't have anything that could prove otherwise at that time. They couldn't move forward. They couldn't conclusively link Sheila to the murder.
I remember after they questioned her, she left town. She was gone, And I'm going, oh my goodness.
Sheila Keene thought she got away with it. But although the case went cold, didn't mean it was over. This is still all about Marlene Warren. We want to do justice for her.
So as the homicide investigation continued, Michael Warren and Sheila Keene, as individuals, became in the background. Nobody really knew where they were or cared where they were or followed up on them.
The case started to go cold. You had a circumstantial case without a lot of direct evidence. There wasn't enough for prosecutors and police to decide to make a charge. And so this case grew colder by the day.
I had to say to myself, they're never going to find out who did this. My thought of the whole thing was, I gotta let this go. It's killing me. It's ruining my life.
One of the reporters at the Palm Beach Post was revisiting the case. One of our brilliant researchers went, "Oh, they're married."
Michael Warren and Sheila Keene had gotten married, and that started a whole new interest of aha.
They moved to Virginia. Sheila changes her name to Debbie, dyed her hair blonde. They open a fast food restaurant. Have a happy life for years. They would invite their neighbors over for dinner and have dinner parties, and they were likable. They were a couple who seemed good and normal. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office got a grant to re-examine old cases, and they chose this clown murder case. I think the reason they did might have been because of its allure and just how sensational it was.
Marlene Warren died after being shot in the face by a clown.
That shooter, a clown carrying flowers and balloons.
Marlene Warren had just entered her door, greeted by a clown.
It was a huge murder. It was a shocking murder. I don't think it ever went out of the minds of law enforcement. And then I think the learning that they were married compelled them even more.
I found out that they opened up the case again. I mean, I was crying, but happy tears. I've never had that feeling before. You know, it was really wild.
A new detective took over the case, and she started to go through these decades-old bags of evidence, and she found among them a 6 to 8 inch fiber attached to one of the balloons left at the scene of Marlene's murder. And she got it analyzed. And that fiber matched the fiber found in the getaway car, and it also matched fiber found in Sheila's house. So here's the first definite connection, putting Sheila at the scene.
Back in 1990, they didn't have DNA technology like we have today. In 2014, new DNA technology came back with a hit from the strand of hair that was in the car that showed that the DNA in the car matched a mixture of Sheila Keene Warren and another person.
It was a wow moment. Finally, police had a scientific connection between the hair and Sheila Keene.
There was a meeting with the state attorney's office, and the decision was made to make the arrest of Sheila Keene for the murder of Marlene Warren.
We were determined to do justice. We wanted her to be held accountable for her evil actions. She was the evil clown, and her day was coming.
Breaking news, new documents shed light on a clown killer mystery and how investigators tracked down the suspect hundreds of miles away.
This was the news that people had been waiting for years, and the announcement of her arrest just reignited that sensation and this whole entire story.
They were watching them up at their home in Virginia, and they wanted to make the arrest away from the house.
So we worked with law enforcement to set up a checkpoint. And when she was driving, they pulled her over. They told her she was under arrest.
Sheila Keene didn't say, "What am I getting arrested for?"
She only had one question for law enforcement: if her husband was going to be arrested too. Once Sheila Keene Warren was arrested, she was brought back to Palm Beach County to face justice.
After 27 years, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office says it has cracked the Wellington killer clown cold case. Last night in Virginia, detectives arrested Sheila Keene Warren, who was the victim's husband's mistress.
I saw a bunch of pictures of her. That picture were the same eyes as the day that she killed my mother. Those eyes, when she got arrested, were all beady and looking exactly like that day. You know, I saw the eyes, and the eyes don't lie.
see if you could answer some questions that really weren't ever answered back then.
I didn't do it, so that's the end of the story. I'm not talking to you.
You don't want to talk, you don't want to give your side of the story as to what happened.
Of course, in Sheila's interview, she continued to deny everything about the homicide of Marlene Warren and any involvement at all in her death.
Okay. You're charged with the first-degree murder, okay, of Marlene Warren.
So it's a huge deal. Sheila is facing the death penalty.
Okay. I'm gonna go up to the regional jail and process you, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Even with all of this excitement and the momentum of her arrest, things slow way down very quickly. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office evidence room was audited, and auditors found that bags of evidence, including those taken from the crime scene in the clown murder, were left open, just wide open.
We were looking at a box full of evidence that wasn't in really good shape. I'm thinking, oh God, if I was the other lawyer, I'd eat this case apart. You know, so many things were going through my head, you know, that she could just walk.
And then in the midst of that, the COVID pandemic hit, and our courthouse basically shut down for over 2 years. And during that time, we lost a key witness who passed.
Each day that passes, evidence is getting weaker. You've got fewer and fewer witnesses. Sheila had a robust team of defense attorneys who did everything they could to poke holes in the prosecutor's case.
The discussion started coming together about what's our realistic expectation of what we can get out of this crime at this time.
Prosecutors decided not to pursue the death penalty. She could be sentenced to life in prison, but not executed. It got so close to trial that Dave Ehrenberg, the state attorney, was on TV saying, this trial is coming in 2 weeks, and we are so confident that she's going to be convicted.
I had to get to the point and tell myself, no matter how this ends, I have to be good with it. If she walks and doesn't get anything, I got to be good with it.
Finally, the trial is just around the corner, and we get a tip that Sheila is about to plead guilty in less than an hour.
The old school. Yeah, this is a 1990.
No one expected it. I go to the courthouse because we've gotten this tip.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, Ms. Keem Warren witness plea of guilty as outlined in the plea agreement.
The state offered her a pretty remarkable plea deal. She pleads guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 12-year prison sentence, which was just a huge shock.
I would never have entered into this plea agreement unless Joey approved it. The victim is really important to us, and Joe said that he was ready to move on and have some measure of closure.
I couldn't deny it. I wanted a conviction. And so did they. If she was going to do 12 years, let's do the 12 years. She'll pay. One way or another, she'll get what's coming to her.
The whole time Sheila Keene Warren was behind bars, she never let on that she was the clown killer. Michael Warren was in the car with a perfect alibi while this occurred. There was no evidence that Michael participated in the murder of his wife. So we do not have enough to charge him. And if that changes, we'll be ready.
Everybody loved my mom. Nobody disliked her. She was always honest, caring, discerning to everyone that wanted to help themselves. She was very alive. You know, she would always laugh and she would see the good in everything. She taught me how to do that, and that was a blessing.
The night doesn't start with a scream. It starts with silence. A kind of silence, so complete it feels staged, like the town itself is holding its breath. In the early hours of October 14th, 2001, in a Texas town most Americans couldn't point on a map, one house stays dark longer than it should, one porch light never switches on, one routine quietly breaks, and no one notices because nothing ever happens here. Not real crimes. Not the kind that end up on the evening news. Not the kind that leave a name frozen in police files for decades under two words that sound harmless but aren't. Cold case. By sunrise, the silence is wrong. The mailbox is full. The car is still in the driveway. The back door is unlocked. Inside, the air is heavy, unmoving, carrying the faint metallic tang that doesn't belong in a family home. The kind of smell that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. The kind of smell officers will later say they recognized instantly, even before they saw the blood dried into the carpet fibers, even before they saw the overturned chair, the broken lamp, the clock stopped at 2:17 a.m., frozen like the moment time gave up. The victim is young. Too young for a town that prides itself on raising kids who grow old here. A name everyone knows. A face from the high school yearbook. From church bake sales. From Friday night football games where the bleachers fill and the past never feels dangerous. There are no signs of forced entry. No clear murder weapon. No note. No explanation. Just absence. Just questions. Police arrive fast because nothing like this ever happens here. Because when it does, the whole town shows up at the tape line. Neighbors whispering theories before the body is even removed. Reporters circling like vultures, sensing a story bigger than the town itself. The sheriff promises answers. Investigators promise justice. The family stands on a lawn, stunned, clinging to each other, certain this will be solved quickly. Because everyone knows everyone here. Because secrets don't survive in places this small. They're wrong. The first hours are frantic. Fingerprints lifted from surfaces that feel too clean. Footprints in soft soil that lead nowhere. A neighbor swears they heard a car late that night, but can't describe it. Another remembers a figure in the distance, but can't say when or where or who. A friend mentions an argument weeks earlier, but nothing violent. Nothing that explains this. Every detail feels important. Every detail leads nowhere. By the end of the week, the headlines are already shifting. Shock, tragedy, community reeling. Police say they're following leads. Police say they're confident. Police say there is no danger to the public. Behind closed doors, the truth is uglier. There is no suspect, no clear motive, no timeline that makes sense. Evidence collected in a rush, cataloged with a quiet fear that something vital is already slipping through their fingers. DNA technology exists, but not like it will someday. What they have isn't enough. Not yet. Weeks pass, then months. The memorial flowers fade. The yellow tape comes down. Life resumes, at least on the surface, because it has to, but every unlocked door feels different now. Every unfamiliar car stands out. Parents start walking their kids to school. The town learns a new phrase, one whisper with discomfort, cold case, spoken like a curse, like an admission of failure. Years grind forward. Leads dry up. Detectives are reassigned. Files are boxed, labeled, shelved. The case is never officially closed, but it might as well be. Birthdays pass without the victim. Holidays leave an empty chair at the table. The family keeps asking. The town slowly stops answering. And then something strange happens. Not loudly, not on the news. Quietly, a name resurfaces. A name that was always there, buried in old interview notes. Dismissed early, explained away by alibis that sounded solid enough at the time. A name that belonged to someone trusted. Someone local. Someone who stayed. By the time investigators look again, 2 decades have passed. Technology has changed. Memories have shifted. People have aged or moved or died. But the evidence hasn't. It's been waiting. In a lab hundreds of miles away, a sample once considered useless is re-examined. Numbers align. Patterns emerge. A profile forms. And suddenly, a case that refused to die begins to breathe again. The phone call comes on an ordinary afternoon. No sirens, no warning, just a knock on a door no one ever expected police to knock on. Inside that house, in that same quiet Texas town, a life built on routine, on familiarity, on the comfort of never being suspected, begins to collapse. By nightfall, the news breaks. An arrest. A cold case cracked. A suspect hiding in plain sight. The town gathers again, just like it did in 2001. But this time the shock cuts deeper, because the danger wasn't some stranger passing through. It was woven into the place itself, living next door, sharing sidewalks, blending in for 20 years while the truth waited patiently in the dark. And as the cameras roll and the headlines spread, one question hangs heavier than all the others, a question that will haunt this town long after the arrest, long after the trial, long after the reporters leave. The arrest doesn't bring relief. It brings noise. Questions shouted across front lawns, murmured in grocery store aisles, whisper at church pews where heads bow but eyes stay open, watching, measuring, recalculating memories that suddenly feel contaminated. In towns like this, an arrest doesn't close a wound. It tears it wider, exposing everything people worked for years to forget. Back in 2001, investigators believed time was their ally. They believed pressure would crack someone. They believed the truth, like everything else in this town, would eventually surface. But time didn't cooperate. It blurred edges. It softened statements. It turned certainty into something negotiable. Witnesses forgot exact dates. Alibis became vague. Small inconsistencies were chalked up to stress, grief, confusion. Nobody wanted to imagine the answer was already sitting across from them, nodding politely, answering questions without hesitation. The initial investigation had followed the script. Friends first. Ex-partners. Anyone with a temper, a record, a motive that made sense on paper. They tore through phone logs, pagers, handwritten notes stuck to the fridge. They retraced the victim's final day hour by hour, trying to build a timeline sturdy enough to stand on. But timelines collapse when one piece doesn't fit, and here, too many pieces were missing. One detective would later say the scene felt staged, but not carefully enough. Something about it suggested haste, panic, a moment where control slipped. The overturned chair, the broken lamp, the clock stopped mid-minute. Not because it mattered, but because someone hit it hard enough to kill the power. Small details, easy to overlook, impossible to explain. There was DNA, but not enough, not the kind that pointed cleanly in one direction. In 2001, DNA was a promise more than a solution. Samples were logged, sealed, stored with hope but little expectation. They tested what they could, compared against limited databases, came up empty, and moved on. You don't stop investigating because science fails you, but you slow down. You rely more on people. And people lie, or forget, or protect each other without realizing they're doing it. The town offered theories freely. A drifter, a jealous lover, a deal gone wrong. Every theory carried just enough truth to sound convincing, just enough distance to feel safe. Anything was better than accepting that the danger wore a familiar face. Years later, when cold case detectives reopened the file, the first thing they noticed wasn't what was missing. It was what had been ignored. Statements taken but never cross-checked. Names circled once and never again. An interview transcript where one answer didn't match the next, buried under pages of routine questions. At the time, it hadn't raised alarms. Now it screamed. They started from scratch. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. They rebuilt the victim's final weeks. Who they trusted, who they argued with, who knew their schedule, their habits. The fact that the back door was often left unlocked because this was a safe town, because no one ever thought twice about it. Someone had known. Someone had taken advantage of that trust. The suspect, when interviewed again years later, sounded calm, almost offended by the implication. They had lived here their whole life, had never left, had raised a family, paid taxes, shown up when the town needed volunteers. They remembered the night vaguely, like everyone else. Nothing unusual, nothing worth mentioning. Their alibi was simple. Too simple. the kind that depends on no one remembering enough to challenge it. But memory is a strange thing. It decays unevenly. Some details rot away. Others sharpen with time. A former neighbor recalled a car where it didn't belong. A vehicle they hadn't thought about in years until a detective showed them an old photograph. The color, the shape, the way it sat too long with the engine running. A former co-worker remembered a sudden change in behavior weeks after the murder. Short temper, nervous energy, long silences where there hadn't been any before. None of it was proof. All of it mattered. Then there was the evidence room. The shelves no one touched anymore. Boxes sealed with tape yellowed by age. Inside one of them, the sample that would change everything. Advances in forensic science didn't just improve accuracy. They rewrote possibility. Genetic genealogy opened doors that hadn't existed before, allowing investigators to build family trees from fragments of DNA, to trace connections backward instead of waiting for a direct hit. It was slow, expensive, controversial. But for a cold case like this, it was the last card left to play. The lab work took months, then more months, then silence. When the call finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No congratulations. No celebration. Just a technician stating results with clinical precision. The DNA profile didn't match anyone in criminal databases, but it did link to relatives. Distant ones. Enough to narrow the field. Enough to point quietly, inexorably, toward a single family line rooted deep in this town. Investigators didn't rush. They watched. They verified. They rebuilt timelines again, this time with a new name at the center. What emerged was unsettling. The suspect had opportunity, proximity, knowledge of the victim's routine, a reason, small and personal, that hadn't seemed significant in 2001, but now carried weight. A disagreement, a perceived slight, the kind of motive that doesn't look like murder until it's too late. When they moved in, they moved carefully. A discarded cup, a cigarette, but DNA collected quietly, legally, without confrontation. Another wait, another test, another confirmation. This time, there was no ambiguity. The match was real. 20 years after the night that changed everything, the pieces finally aligned. The arrest was swift, controlled, almost anticlimactic. No resistance, no confession, just disbelief, spreading through the town faster than the news could keep up. People struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the accusations now plastered across screens and headlines. The family of a victim learned the same way everyone else did. Through a call, through a reporter, through a name they recognized instantly. Relief collided with grief, validation with rage. Justice delayed long enough to feel distorted, incomplete, heavy. And as the suspect sat in custody, silent, expression unreadable, one truth became unavoidable. This case hadn't gone cold because the evidence disappeared. It had gone cold because the answer was too close, too ordinary, too uncomfortable to accept. In the quiet hours after the arrest, the town lay awake again. Porch lights on, curtains pulled back, people replaying conversations from years ago, wondering what they missed, wondering what they chose not to see. Because the most terrifying part of this story wasn't that the killer escaped justice for 20 years. It was that they never really left. The problem with reopening a cold case isn't finding new evidence. It's reopening old truths people already buried. Every file pulled from storage carries more than paper. It carries assumptions, decisions, mistakes that felt reasonable at the time. And once you start reading again, slowly, carefully, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This case didn't fail because there was nothing to follow. It failed because following would have meant looking directly at someone no one wanted to doubt. Back in 2001, the suspect's name surfaced early. Not loudly, not urgently. Just enough to earn a few questions. A short interview, a note in the margin of a report. They knew the victim. Not intimately, not publicly, but enough. Enough to explain familiarity. Enough to explain access. The kind of connection investigators see every day and dismiss just as often because it doesn't scream danger, because it looks normal. Normal is where killers hide best. The interview transcript reads clean on the surface. Calm answers. Cooperative tone. No visible agitation. The suspect didn't lawyer up, didn't resist, didn't contradict themselves in obvious ways. They spoke the language of small towns fluently, weaving in names, routines, shared experiences that made them sound grounded, reliable, harmless. And when asked about the night of the murder, they offer an alibi that leaned heavily on routine. Home, asleep, nothing unusual. At the time, that was enough. Investigators had pressure from all sides, media demanding updates, a grieving family demanding answers, a community demanding reassurance. They needed progress, and progress meant movement. It meant chasing leads that looked active, volatile, dramatic. It meant focusing on people who fit the profile everyone expected. Strangers, troublemakers, anyone but the quiet constant who blended into the background. The case drifted, then stalled, then froze. Years later, cold case detectives approached it differently. Not with urgency, but with suspicion. Not asking who stood out, but who didn't. Who benefited most from being overlooked. Who survived the years unchanged, untouched, unquestioned. They circled the old interview again. This time, they read it like a confession written in invisible ink. One line stood out, a detail about the timeline that didn't match other statements. Not dramatically wrong, just slightly off, enough to suggest memory wasn't being recalled, but constructed. Another answer contradicted a neighbor's account that had been dismissed as unreliable. Another aligned too neatly with what investigators already believed in 2001, as if the suspect knew exactly which version of events would slide through without friction. They compared notes. They reconstructed the night minute by minute. They noticed gaps where no one else existed to verify the alibi. They noticed how often the suspect placed himself alone. Then came motive, or what passes for it in cases like this. There was no grand plan, no financial gain, no elaborate revenge, just proximity and resentment simmering quietly over time. A dispute that seemed trivial to outsiders. Words exchanged, boundaries crossed, pride bruised. The kind of conflict that festers when no one intervenes because it doesn't look dangerous enough to matter. Until it does. Friends of the suspect remembered the shift afterward. Not immediately, not in a way they recognized then. But looking back, it was obvious. The defensiveness, the sudden sensitivity to questions about the case, the insistence on bringing it up unprompted, as if staying ahead of the narrative mattered, the way they volunteered opinions on who must have done it, steering suspicion elsewhere with practiced ease. Investigators tracked the suspect's movements in years following the murder. No sudden flight, no breakdown, no reckless behavior, just consistency, stability, a life that moved forward while the victims remained frozen in police photographs and faded newspaper clippings. That stability became its own kind of camouflage. Monsters aren't supposed to pay mortgages and coach you sports. So no one looked too closely, until the science forced them to. The DNA confirmation changed the tone of everything. It stripped away ambiguity. It reframed every interaction, every overlooked clue, every decision to move on instead of pressing harder. Investigators didn't celebrate. They felt the weight of it. The understanding that if technology had arrived sooner, the outcome might have been different. That justice delayed wasn't just an abstract phrase here. It was a measurable loss. When they confronted the suspect again, the difference was immediate. The calm was still there, but it was thinner, tighter. The answers slowed. The pauses stretched. Familiar deflections lost their rhythm. The suspect asked for clarification more often, asked what evidence investigators had, asked questions that revealed fear without ever admitting it. There was no confession. Not then. Maybe never. But silence can be louder than words. As preparations for trial began, the town fractured along invisible lines. Some refused to believe it. Denial hardened into anger. Others felt a grim sense of recognition, replaying moments that suddenly made sense. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when the suspect's name came up. Old friendships cooled. Long-held loyalties strained under the pressure of facts no one could ignore anymore. For the victim's family, Reopening the case reopened everything else. The night, the knock on the door, the years of waiting, hope returning only to twist into something more complicated. Closure wasn't a clean finish. It was a collision between past and present, between relief and a grief that had learned how to survive without answers. As the trial loomed, one question dominated every whispered conversation. Not whether the suspect could have done it, but how they managed to live among everyone for so long without slipping, without being seen, without anyone noticing the weight they carried quietly through the years. The answer was uncomfortable. They didn't hide. They were hidden by a system that trusted too easily, by a town that wanted peace more than truth, by the belief that evil announces itself loudly. And as the courtroom lights warmed and the evidence was prepared for presentation, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just a story about a murder left unsolved. It was a story about how easily silence becomes protection, how quickly familiarity turns into blind faith, and how many chances of truth can be given before it forces its way back into the light. Because the arrest didn't end the case. It only exposed how deep it really went. By the time the courtroom doors open, the town has already chosen sides. Not loudly, not with signs or chants, just with silence, with where people sit, with who makes eye contact, and who looks at the floor. The building smells like old wood and recycled air, like a place designed to absorb tension without releasing it. Every bench feels occupied by memory. Every step echoes longer than it should. The suspect enters without drama. No shackles visible. No outburst. Just a measured walk, shoulders squared, face carefully neutral. To anyone who doesn't know the story, they could be anyone. That's the point. That's always been the point. The prosecution watches closely, not for guilt, but for cracks. The defense watches for the opposite. The family watches and feels something twist in their chest that has no name. The opening statements don't reveal anything new. They can't. They only frame it. The prosecution talks about a life cut short, about a community betrayed by its own assumptions, about science catching up to a lie that had years to settle. The defense talks about reasonable doubt, about memory's unreliability, about the danger of rewriting the past with modern tools. Both sides speak with confidence. Only one of them needs to be right. Evidence comes first. Slowly, methodically, photographs from the crime scene appear on a screen that looks too clean for what it shows. The overturned chair, the shattered lamp. The clock stopped at 2:17 a.m. Jurors lean forward, then lean back, instinctively distancing themselves from images that refuse to stay contained. An investigator explains what was found, what wasn't, how nothing at the scene pointed cleanly in one direction, how chaos leaves traces, even when it's brief. Then the DNA, the heart of it, the thing that resurrected the case. An expert takes a stand, voice steady, words precise. They explain genetic genealogy without drama, without speculation, percentages, probabilities, family trees built from fragments so small they once seemed meaningless. The defense presses hard, probing for doubt, for margin of error, for any crack wide enough to crawl through. The expert doesn't flinch. The science isn't perfect, but it's persistent. It doesn't forget. It doesn't misremember. It waits. Witnesses follow, some reluctant, some eager, some visibly shaken by the weight of time. A neighbor testifies about a car seen too late at night, a memory once dismissed now given gravity by context. A former co-worker talked about changes in behavior after murder, how they didn't register as alarming then, how they can't be unseen now. Each testimony lands softly on its own. Together, they begin to press down. The defense counters with character, years of stability, no criminal record, a life that looks incompatible with violence. They call people who vouch for the suspect, who speak about kindness, reliability, generosity. Their voices tremble, not with deception, but with confusion. They are telling the truth as they know it. And that truth hurts, because it's real, because monsters don't always look monstrous, because good deeds don't erase bad ones. The courtroom absorbs it all, without reaction. Then comes a moment everyone expects. The suspect takes a stand. The room tightens. Breath holds. They speak calmly. Too calmly, some think. They deny everything. They explain the inconsistencies as memory flaws. They insist they have nothing to hide. They look directly at the jury, at the family, at the people who once trusted them without question. There is no confession, no breakdown, just insistence, just a repetition of innocence polished smooth by years of rehearsal. Cross-examination is surgical. The prosecutor doesn't raise their voice. They don't need to. They focus on the timeline, on the gaps, on statements that don't align with physical evidence. They ask the same question in slightly different ways, watching for fatigue, for slippage, for the moment the story frays. The suspect holds on. Barely. Outside the courtroom, the town waits. Cameras crowd the steps. Reporters recycle the same phrases: cold case, shocking arrest, community shaken, until they lose meaning. People avoid each other in public. Conversations end when someone approaches. Trust fractures along fault lines no one knew existed. Every shared memory becomes suspect. Every past interaction re-examined under a harsher light. For the family, the trial is an endurance test. They sit through details they never wanted to know, relive a night they've been trying to survive for 2 decades. Justice doesn't feel triumphant. It feels exhausting. Each day ends with the same question lingering unspoken. Will this be enough? Closing arguments arrive quietly. The prosecution returns to the core: opportunity, access, motive, DNA, a pattern that makes sense only when denial is removed. The defense reminds the jury that certainty is dangerous, that technology can mislead, that a life should not be destroyed on probabilities alone. Both are right in different ways. The jury must choose which risk they can live with. Deliberation stretches. Hours. Then days. The town holds its breath again, just like it did in 2001. Porch lights on. Radios low. Phones checked obsessively. No one sleeps well. The past presses against the present until the distance between them collapses. When a verdict comes, it doesn't explode. It lands. Heavy. Final. Whatever the outcome, nothing feels resolved. Guilty or not, the damage is permanent. The town will never return to what it was. The illusion of safety has been stripped away, replaced with a harder truth. Justice, when it arrives this late, doesn't heal. It exposes. As people file out of the courtroom, some cry, some stare straight ahead. Some avoid looking at the suspect as they are led away. Others can't look away at all. The cameras catch it all, but they miss the quiet devastation underneath. The understanding that this story doesn't end here. It lingers. In conversations that will never happen. In questions that will never be answered. In the knowledge that time doesn't just hide the truth. It teaches us how to live with it. And long after the courtroom empties, long after the headlines fade, the town remains awake, listening to the silence again, wondering how many other stories like this are still waiting, patient and unresolved, just beneath the surface. After the verdict, the town doesn't celebrate. It exhales, not in relief, but in disbelief, like someone who's been holding their breath so long they've forgotten what normal breathing feels like. The courthouse empties, cameras pack up, reporters move on to the next story, but the wait stays. It settles into houses, into routines, into conversations that trail off before reaching their point. Justice, this late, doesn't arrive like an answer. It arrives like an interruption. People return to work, to school, to schedules that look unchanged on paper. But everything feels different now. Names sound heavier. Faces carry new meanings. Familiar streets feel narrower, less forgiving. The town has learned something it can't unlearn, that safety was never guaranteed, only assumed. The victim's family becomes quieter, not because the pain is gone, but because it has shifted. For years, grief was mixed with uncertainty, with the gnawing fear that the truth might never surface. Now the truth is here, and it's brutal in its clarity. It doesn't bring peace. It brings confrontation with what was taken, with how long it took, with the knowledge that closure is a word people use when they don't know what else to offer. They visit the grave more often at first, then less, not because they care less, but because being there hurts differently now. The questions have changed, not who did this, But why no one stopped it sooner? Why the signs were missed? Why a life had to wait decades for acknowledgement? The suspect's family faces a different kind of reckoning. Their world collapses publicly. Friends stop calling. Invitations dry up. Children grow up under a shadow they didn't choose. They wrestle with two realities that refuse to coexist: the person they loved and the person the evidence describes. Both feel true. Neither offers comfort. Some in town defend them quietly. Others judge loudly. Most avoid the topic altogether. Silence becomes a new language, thick and awkward, filling spaces where easy conversation once lived. In grocery stores and gas stations, people recognize each other instantly and pretend not to. The investigation's failures become a topic of uncomfortable discussion. Former officers give interviews framed by hindsight. They explain constraints, technology limits, the pressure of public expectation. All of it is true. None of it feels sufficient. The town learns how fragile certainty really is, how easily confidence can slide into complacency. Cold case units elsewhere cite this story as a victory for persistence, for science, for never giving up. And it is, but for the people who lived inside it, victory feels like a word that belongs to someone else. They don't feel triumphant. They feel exposed, like their private tragedy has been dissected, analyzed, turned into a lesson. At night, the town is quieter than it used to be. Porch lights stay on longer. Doors lock earlier. Parents check on their kids twice instead of once. Not because danger is new, but because denial is gone. The illusion that evil comes from outside is shattered. It came from within. It always could have. Years from now, newcomers will hear the story in fragments. A cold case, a shocking arrest, a reminder that justice can wait, but never forget. They'll nod, absorb it as history, unaware of how deeply it still pulses beneath the surface. The town will smile politely and change the subject. But those who were there remember the feeling. The moment familiarity turned into suspicion. The day's silence finally spoke. The case file is closed now, labeled, archived, but the story isn't. It lives on in cautionary glances, in changed habits, in the unspoken understanding that some truths don't end when they're revealed. They linger, they reshape, they demand to be carried forward. And somewhere between memory and regret, between justice and loss, the town settles into a new version of itself. Older, wiser, less innocent. A place that knows firsthand what those two words really mean when spoken softly, almost apologetically. Cold case. Because even when it's solved, the cold never completely leaves. Time moves again, but it doesn't smooth anything out. It sharpens edges. In the months after the trial, the story refuses to stay buried. It resurfaces in documentaries, podcasts, late-night discussions framed by ominous music and slow zooms on courthouse steps. Outsiders analyze the case with clinical curiosity, dissecting motives and missteps like a puzzle finally solved. For them, it's content. For the town, it's a wound reopened every time the name is spoken out loud. Former investigators replay their choices endlessly. Decisions made under pressure. Leads prioritized. Others dismissed. They tell themselves they did the best they could with what they had. Sometimes they believe it. Sometimes they don't. Because hindsight has a way of turning reasonable judgment into unbearable doubt. One more question. One more follow-up. One more hour spent pushing instead of moving on. The math of regret never balances. The cold case becomes a cautionary tale inside law enforcement circles. Training sessions reference it, without naming it. A reminder that proximity doesn't equal innocence. That familiarity can be a shield. Younger officers listen carefully, nodding, promising themselves they'll never make the same mistake. Veterans stare ahead, knowing better. Knowing how easy it is to say that before you're standing in the middle of a town begging for reassurance. The evidence room is quieter now. The boxes remain, but one shelf sits emptier than before. The space where the case once lived feels symbolic, like an absence that carries its own weight. Science solved what time obscured, but science didn't attend the funeral. It did watch parents age while waiting for answers. It didn't sit through years of birthdays marked by absence. The victim's friends, now older, scattered, carry the story differently. Some avoid it entirely, as if silence might finally grant peace. Others cling to it, retelling the same moments from youth with altered endings, imagining how small choices might have changed everything. Survivors' guilt settles in quietly, unannounced, asking questions no one can answer. In the suspect's empty house, belongings sit untouched, furniture arranged for a life that no longer exists, photos on the wall frozen in happier versions of reality. A place that once felt ordinary now feels contaminated, as if the walls themselves absorb the truth and can't let it go. Eventually, someone will buy it. Eventually, it will be repainted. But it will never be neutral again. The town council debates whether to acknowledge the case publicly. A memorial, a scholarship, something official, something that says this mattered. The discussions stall, not because they don't care, but because every option feels wrong. Too little feels dismissive. Too much feels performative. In the end, they do nothing. And somehow, that choice speaks loudest of all. At night, those who remember the early days of the investigation find themselves awake again. The silence feels familiar now, but not comforting. It's the silence of knowing, not the silence of ignorance. The difference is subtle but profound. One is empty, the other is heavy. The phrase cold case starts to sound misleading. There was nothing cold about it. Not the fear, not the grief, not the years of quiet suspicion that lingered without a target. The case wasn't frozen. It was simmering, unattended, waiting for something, anything, to tip it back into motion. And when it finally did, it didn't restore balance. It disrupted it. It forced a reckoning that extended far beyond one crime. It questioned how well people really know each other, how much trust is built on habit rather than proof, how easily communities confuse calm with safety. The town adapts because it has to. New families move in. Old ones move away. Children who weren't born in 2001 grow up hearing whispers they don't fully understand. For them, it's history. For everyone else, it's a reminder etched into muscle memory, a lesson learned too late. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, someone will drive past the old crime scene without meaning to. They'll slow down without realizing why. The house looks smaller than memory suggests, less significant, just another structure on a familiar road. And that's what makes it unsettling, that something so ordinary could hold something so devastating. There's no final lesson that satisfies, no moral that wraps neatly around the pain, only the understanding that truth has a long reach, and time doesn't weaken it. It just changes the way it arrives. The town lives with that now, with the knowledge that some answers come not to heal, but to remind, that some cases are never really over. They just change temperature. And somewhere in the quiet, beneath routine and rebuilt trust, the echo remains. A question without sound, a warning without words. Cold cases don't sleep. They wait. The waiting changes shape after everything is said to be finished. It's no longer about answers. It's about living with them. Weeks turn into months, and the town learns how to move around the truth without touching it too often. People develop instincts for when to speak and when to stop. Names are avoided. Dates are softened. The past becomes something you gesture toward instead of naming outright. It's not denial anymore. It's self-preservation. The courthouse steps return to normal. Pigeons instead of cameras. Footsteps instead of microphones. But the echo lingers. Anyone who sat through those proceedings carries the rhythm of it in their body. The rise and fall of testimony. The way certainty felt just out of reach. The moment when time collapsed and 20 years pressed into a single verdict. That rhythm doesn't fade. It embeds. Law enforcement reviews quietly continue. Internal memos. Training updates. Small procedural changes that never make the news. No public apology. No dramatic admission. Institutions rarely confess. They adjust. Files are reorganized. Protocols refined. The case becomes a reference point. Cited without emotion, reduced to bullet points that strip away the human cost. Efficiency replaces reckoning. For the family, anniversaries are different now. They mark them privately. No statements. No public gatherings. Grief has learned to travel light. It still arrives, but it doesn't announce itself. It comes in fragments, a song on the radio, a smell in the kitchen, a date circled and uncircled on a calendar. The knowledge of who did it doesn't soften those moments. Sometimes it sharpens them. People ask whether justice helped. The family answers carefully, because the honest answer is complicated. Justice acknowledged the truth. It did not restore what was lost. It did not rewind the years or give back the person they loved. It didn't erase the feeling that the world moved on while they stayed stuck, waiting. Justice arrived, but it arrived late, and lateness leaves its own scars. The suspect's presence fades from daily life. Mugshots become archives. Court sketches collect dust, but their absence creates a vacuum that invites speculation. Some insist they saw signs all along. Others push back, angry at the implication that they should have known. Memory becomes a battleground, reshaped by guilt, pride, and fear of being wrong. The town's younger generation absorbs the story indirectly, through half-sentences, through the way adults go quiet, through rules that seem overly cautious. Lock the door. Call if you're late. Don't assume. They inherit vigilance without context, caution without origin. One day they'll ask why. The answers will be incomplete. A local journalist revisits the case, hoping to write something reflective, something that goes beyond the headlines. They interview residents who agree reluctantly, carefully choosing words that don't reopen wounds. The piece never quite lands. It feels intrusive. The town wants rest, not interpretation. The article runs anyway. It changes nothing. At night, the quiet has a different texture now. It's not threatening, but it's alert. The kind of quiet that listens back. Dogs bark less. Trains pass through on schedule. The town looks peaceful again, at least outsiders. But peace, once broken, is never the same as innocence. Every solved cold case carries a paradox. It proves persistence matters, and it proves how long failure can last. This one becomes a reference in conferences and classrooms, discussed with professional distance. Few mention the way it hollowed out a place that trusted itself too much. Sometimes, someone wonders aloud whether the case should ever have been reopened. The question is uncomfortable. It sounds cruel, but it surfaces anyway. Would ignorance have been kinder? Would not knowing have spared the town this fracture? The thought doesn't survive long. Truth may hurt, but the alternative corrodes. The real legacy of the case isn't the arrest. It's the awareness. An awareness that settles in quietly and refuses to leave. That safety is a habit, not a guarantee. That evil doesn't always announce itself. That time can hide answers, but it never destroys them. It only delays their arrival. The town carries that awareness forward. Into meetings, into parenting, into the way people look at each other, just a second longer than they used to. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's there. And somewhere, deep in storage rooms and shared memory, the case still exists, not as a file, not as a headline, but as a presence. A reminder that silence can be patient, that familiarity can deceive, and that the past is never as finished as we want it to be. Cold cases don't end. They settle in. Years layer themselves on top of the truth, not to bury it, but to test how much weight it can carry. The town grows around a story the way trees grow around a scar, reshaping but never erasing it. New storefronts open. Old ones close. Names on mailboxes change. Yet certain routes are still avoided. Certain hours still feel heavier than others, as if the place itself remembers what people try not to say. The case slips into education. Not officially, not with plaques or ceremonies, but informally, through warnings passed down like folk knowledge. Don't assume. Double check. Ask again. These aren't rules written anywhere. They're instincts inherited. The town becomes good at reading silences, at noticing when something doesn't fit. It's a skill learned the hard way. For investigators elsewhere, the story becomes shorthand, a slide in a presentation, a paragraph in a manual, a reminder that the first answer is often the most comfortable, not the most accurate. They study the timeline, the missed opportunities, the early dismissal of a name that didn't look dangerous enough. They nod. They take notes. They promise vigilance. The lesson travels farther than the pain ever could. The victim's name appears less often now, not because it matters less, but because repetition risks reducing it to a symbol. The family guards it carefully. They want it spoken with intention, not habit. They decline interviews. They keep certain memories private, unshared, untouched by analysis. Some things deserve to exist outside explanation. Occasionally, a stranger visits the town, drawn by curiosity, by the lingering pull of a story that refuses to fade. They walk the streets, take photos, try to imagine how it all happened. They leave with impressions, not understanding. You can't feel the weight of years in an afternoon. You can't hear the echoes unless you've lived among them. The suspect fades into abstraction, a name on paper, a case number. Time works differently on the other side of the system. Days are counted, routines imposed, identity reduced to records and schedules. Whatever explanations they once held close remain unspoken. The silence persists unbroken, offering no final insight. Some truths never volunteer themselves. In quiet moments, people wonder what justice really measured here. Accountability, yes. Recognition, perhaps. But healing? Healing is slower. It doesn't respond to verdicts. It responds to patience, to the steady rebuilding of trust, one small interaction at a time. The town practices that rebuilding without ceremony, without announcement, because that's the only way it knows how. Children who were born long after 2001 pass, the place is tied to the story, without knowing why adults tense slightly there. One day, someone will tell them, not everything, just enough. Enough to explain the caution, enough to pass on the awareness without transferring the fear. The case becomes quieter in the public record. Fewer clicks, fewer references. The world moves on. It always does. But locally, the story has already completed its transformation. It's no longer an event. It's a context, a background condition shaping how the town understands itself. At dusk, when the light thins and the air cools, the streets look peaceful again. It's an earned peace, not a naive one. The kind that knows what it costs. People lock doors, then pause, listening, not out of panic, but out of respect for what they learned when they stopped listening the first time. There's no dramatic ending waiting anymore. No hidden chapter. No revelation left to surface. Just continuity. Life moving forward, carrying with it the imprint of a night that changed everything, and the years it took to face that change honestly. Cold cases are often described as frozen moments. This one wasn't frozen. It was moving slowly, deliberately, through time, reshaping a town without asking permission. And when it finally revealed itself, it didn't conclude the story. It taught the town how to live with an unfinished feeling, with answers that arrive late, with truth that demands patience instead of applause. The quiet returns not as an absence, but as a presence that understands what it's holding. And the town holds it too. Long after the case stops being news, it begins doing quieter work. It reshapes memory. People start remembering things differently, not because they're lying, but because context has changed. Moments once dismissed as ordinary now feel charged. A look held too long. A conversation cut short. A presence that lingered when it didn't need to. The past rearranges itself under the pressure of what is now known, and there's no way to stop it. Memory isn't fixed. It adapts to survive. The town's elders carry the heaviest version of that burden. They remember before and after. Before the night that split everything. After the years of waiting. After the arrest that confirmed what no one wanted to believe. They speak less now, not out of secrecy, but fatigue. They've told the story enough times to know it never lands the same way twice. Local law enforcement feels the shift most acutely. Every new case is filtered to the shadow of the old one. Officers double-check instincts they once trusted implicitly. They document more. Ask again. Push a little harder when something feels off. The past doesn't paralyze them, but it does slow them down. And in this line of work, slowing down can mean the difference between assumption and proof. The phrase cold case takes on a different tone here. It's no longer abstract. It's personal. It's a reminder that time doesn't neutralize harm. It just changes how it's carried. People hear about other long unsolved crimes on the news and feel an immediate pull, a recognition that cuts through distance. They know what waiting feels like. They know how hope dulls, then sharpens again without warning. The victim's absence becomes a presence of its own. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, a space that never filled, even as life continued around it. Friends who moved away still think of this town as the place where something ended too soon, where you stopped feeling endless, where the future learned how fragile it could be. There are moments of anger still, directed nowhere in particular, at systems, at timing, at the randomness that allowed one choice to echo for decades. Anger doesn't fade neatly. It recedes, then returns, triggered by something small and unexpected. A headline, a familiar road, a question asked by someone too young to remember. The suspect's silence becomes its own kind of noise. No explanation, no admission, no narrative to compete with the evidence. Just absence. For some, that silence confirms everything. For others, it leaves an itch that can't be scratched. Humans want stories to end with understanding. This one refuses. Every so often, someone suggests the town is healed. The word doesn't sit right. Healing implies repair. This feels more like adaptation. Like learning to walk with a limp you don't talk about, because it's become part of how you move through the world. The case enters local lore, stripped of specifics, told cautiously to newcomers as a reminder rather than a warning. Not to scare, to ground, to say, this place knows something now, something it didn't before. On quiet drives at night, headlights sweep over familiar signs, familiar intersections, familiar houses. Everything looks the same. That's what's unsettling. The truth didn't change the landscape. It changed the way the landscape is seen. Once you know what happened, neutrality disappears. Every place becomes capable of holding a story you don't know yet. The town doesn't dwell on the crime anymore. It doesn't need to. The lesson has settled into behavior, into reflex, locking doors, trusting but verifying, listening when something doesn't feel right. These aren't reactions anymore. They're habits. And that's how the case continues to exist, not in files or footage, but in the space between assumption and certainty, in the pause before people decide they understand someone completely, in the recognition that knowing a place, well, doesn't mean knowing everything about it. Cold cases are often described as unfinished business. This one finished something, but it didn't close it. It left behind a deeper awareness, a permanent adjustment in how reality is interpreted. The town lives inside that adjustment now, quietly, continuously. And even as years pass and names fade from headlines, the understanding remains, steady and unresolved, like a low hum beneath everyday life. Not every story ends. Some simply become part of the air. The years keep coming, indifferent to what they carry with them. Calendars flip, seasons repeat. The town marks time the way it always has, by school years, by harvests, by the slow turnover of businesses on Main Street. On the surface, nothing signals that this place holds a story that once refused to let go. But underneath, the awareness never fully loosens its grip. People learn to recognize the moments when the past resurfaces without invitation. A siren late at night, a police car parked too long, on a quiet block, a knock on the door after dark. The body reacts before the mind does, heart rate jumping, breath catching, a memory of fear that doesn't ask permission to return. Trauma, even shared trauma, doesn't need reminders. It finds its own. The case reshapes how loss is understood here. Death is no longer something distant or abstract. It's specific. It has a date, a face, a name that still carries weight when spoken softly. Funerals feel different now, attended with an unspoken understanding that grief doesn't always move on schedule, that unanswered questions can stretch mourning across decades. Some residents become quietly protective of the town's story. They correct outsiders who get details wrong. They push back against sensationalism. This wasn't entertainment. It wasn't a twist. It was a life interrupted and a truth delayed. Accuracy matters because memory is all that remains once the noise fades. Others do the opposite. They disengage completely. They don't watch the documentaries. They don't read the articles. They change the channel when the case comes up. Avoidance isn't denial, it's survival. Not everyone wants to carry the weight forever, and the town has learned to respect that difference. Law enforcement officers who work the case retire one by one. Some leave town, some stay. They carry private reckonings into quiet lives, replaying decisions in moments of stillness. A few reach out to the family, not with explanations, but with acknowledgement. Words are limited. Regret doesn't translate well. But sometimes, being seen matters more than being solved. The victim's family continues forward in small, deliberate ways. They create routines that don't revolve around the case. They protect joy when it appears, even when it feels undeserved. Grief no longer defines every moment, but it never disappears. It simply learns how to sit beside life instead of blocking it. There is talk, occasionally, of other unsolved cases. Smaller ones, older ones. People wonder what else might be waiting in boxes. What other answers are stalled behind time and assumption? The town listens differently now, with patience, with skepticism, with the understanding that silence can mean many things. At night, when the street's empty and the town returns to its most honest state, there's a sense of watchfulness that doesn't feel anxious anymore. It feels earned, the kind of alert calm that comes from experience rather than fear. The town isn't expecting another tragedy. It's simply aware that certainty is fragile. The phrase cracked cold case still appears in headlines elsewhere, often framed as triumph. Here, it's heard with restraint. Cracked doesn't mean undone. Solved doesn't mean finished. It means acknowledged. It means faced. And facing something this heavy leaves marks. As time stretches on, the story stops being about the crime itself. It becomes about endurance. About how long a place can carry an unresolved truth and still function. About how people adapt to knowledge that arrives too late to change the outcome, but too powerful to ignore. The town doesn't ask for recognition. It doesn't ask to be remembered. It simply continues, shaped by what it learned when certainty failed it. That lesson moves quietly through generations, not as fear, but as caution sharpened by empathy. And somewhere in that continuity, the case reaches its final transformation. No longer an event, no longer a shock, but a reference point, a moment that divided before and after, teaching a place how to live without pretending it understands everything. Cold cases promise resolution. This one delivered something else. Awareness. In the end, nothing dramatic happens. No final revelation. No last confession that ties every thread into a clean knot. Life resumes the way it always does. Unevenly, imperfectly, with more questions than answers, but now it carries a deeper understanding of what time can hide and what it eventually demands. The town settles into a version of itself that knows too much to be naive and too much to be reckless. It understands that certainty is a luxury, that trust is an act of choice, renewed daily, not a permanent state. People don't speak about the case anymore unless they mean to. When they do, their voices lower instinctively, not out of fear, but respect for what the story took from them. The victim's name survives quietly, not carved into stone for public viewing, but spoken in private moments, remembered in gestures, honored through living rather than memorializing. The family has learned that remembrance doesn't require repetition. It requires intention. They move forward, carrying love, without waiting for it to make sense. The suspect fades into the background of the system, becoming what the system always turns people into: records, dates, classifications. Whatever story they might tell remains untold, locked away where it can no longer reshape the past. Silence claims a final word, and in doing so, confirms what this case taught more clearly than any verdict ever could. Not all truths explain themselves. Some only reveal enough to be undeniable. The town lives with that. It doesn't chase closure anymore. It understands that closure is a word invented to comfort those who weren't there. What remains is something quieter, heavier, more honest. Acceptance without relief. Knowledge without satisfaction. Years from now, someone will ask what changed here. The answer won't be immediate. It will come after a pause, after a moment of searching for language that fits. And even then, it won't sound dramatic. It will sound simple, careful, measured. We learn to listen. We learn not to assume. We learn that time doesn't forgive, it remembers. The streets look the same. The houses stand where they always have. The town still feels peaceful to those passing through. But beneath that calm is an understanding earned the hard way, a recognition that stories don't end when they're solved, and justice doesn't erase the past. It reframes it. Cold cases are often described as unfinished business. This one finished teaching what it needed to teach. That answers can wait. That silence can deceive. That familiarity is not proof of safety. And when night falls and the town grows quiet again, the silence no longer feels empty. It feels informed. It knows what it's holding. It knows what has survived. The story doesn't demand to be told anymore. It simply exists. Steady, unresolved in feeling, resolved in truth. And that, finally, is where it rests. There's a moment, long after everything is supposed to be over, when the town realizes the story has changed ownership. It no longer belongs to investigators or courts or headlines. It belongs to time. And time doesn't rush. It doesn't argue. It absorbs. People stop measuring their lives against the case. Not because it stops mattering, but because it has finally found its place. It no longer intrudes. It observes, like a shadow that doesn't move unless the light does. The town doesn't look back often anymore, but when it does, it recognizes itself differently. New routines feel earned. Locking a door isn't fear. It's awareness. Asking questions isn't suspicion. It's care. The town didn't lose its kindness. It refined it. Trust became intentional instead of automatic. Softer, maybe, but stronger where it counts. Some nights, when the air is still and the streets are empty, there's a sense that the town is listening to itself, not for danger, for memory, for the echo of something that once demanded attention and now asks only to be remembered correctly, not exaggerated, not erased, just understood. The case doesn't haunt anymore. Haunting implies unrest. This feels settled in its own imperfect way. The truth arrived, late, heavy, unavoidable. And when it did, it stayed. It didn't fix what was broken, but it named it. Sometimes that's all justice can do. The people who lived through it carry on, not because they forgot, but because they learned how not to be consumed. The ones who didn't live through it inherit the lesson without the weight. That's how survival works. One generation absorbs the impact. The next carries the knowledge. Somewhere in an archive or a database, the case exists as numbers and dates. But here it exists as instinct, as pause, as the quiet decision to look twice instead of once, to ask instead of assume, to listen when silence stretches too long. Cold cases are often remembered for how they end. This one is remembered for what it changed. And in that change, the town continues, not defined by tragedy, not freed from it either, just shaped, permanently, honestly. When morning comes, the sun rises the same way it always has. Light spills over streets that look ordinary to anyone passing through. Nothing announces what happened here. Nothing needs to. The story is finished being told, but it is not finished being felt, and that is where it stays. There is no ceremony for what comes next, no marker in time that says this is where it ends. What follows is quieter than anything before it, and in that quiet, the truth finally settles into its final form, not as a story people tell, but as something they carry without effort, like a reflex learned too young to forget. The town no longer flinches when the case is mentioned. It doesn't lean in either. The reaction is neutral now, practiced, the way people respond to facts that are no longer raw, but never harmless. The words still land. They just don't cut as deep. Scar tissue does its job. What remains most vividly isn't the crime itself, but the waiting, the years where nothing moved, the long stretch where hope existed only as an idea, thin and abstract, sustained by repetition rather than evidence. That waiting reshaped people more than the verdict ever could. It taught patience that bordered on resignation. It taught endurance without reward. Some residents realized slowly that the case taught them how to age, not gracefully, not easily, but attentively. Time was no longer something that simply passed. It accumulated. It carried consequences. It kept score. Birthdays felt different when you understood how many could pass without answers. The victim's absence is no longer sharp. It's integrated, a constant variable in the equation of the town's identity. People speak about them in the present tense, sometimes, without noticing, as if time never fully accepted the loss. Memory resists grammar. The system moves on, as systems do. New cases replace old ones. New technologies promise faster answers. Confidence returns cautiously. But somewhere beneath policy updates and improved databases is a permanent hesitation, a reminder etched into professional instinct. Don't assume the obvious is true. The case becomes less about what happened and more about what almost didn't, almost forgotten, almost ignored permanently, almost accepted as unsolvable. That narrow margin between unresolved and answered haunts more than the violence ever did. It's the space where responsibility lives. People wonder, occasionally, what would have happened if the truth had never surfaced, if the sample had never been retested, if technology had arrived a decade later. The thought doesn't spiral the way it once might have. It just lingers, a reminder of how fragile resolution really is. The town understands now that justice isn't guaranteed by intention. It's guaranteed by persistence, by discomfort, by the willingness to revisit what failed instead of burying it. That understanding didn't come cheap. It was paid for in years. Even silence has changed meaning here. Once it meant nothing. Now it means pay attention. Silence is no longer empty space. It's information waiting to be interpreted. On some evenings, when lights glow softly behind curtains and the town settles into its familiar rhythm, there's a sense of continuity that feels earned. Not innocent, not untouched, but stable, real. The case no longer asks to be solved. It asks to be remembered correctly, not as a miracle of science, not as a shocking twist, but as proof that truth can survive neglect, that time can delay justice but not erase it, and that the most dangerous assumption is believing we already understand what we're looking at. Cold cases don't demand endings. They demand reckoning. And this town finally has done that. Time does something strange after the truth is exposed. It doesn't rush forward the way people expect. It hesitates. It circles back. It forces memories to replay themselves under a new light, as if every moment from the past is now on trial alongside the suspect. Conversations once dismissed as meaningless are re-examined. Glances remembered too vaguely suddenly sharpen. What seemed ordinary becomes suspicious in hindsight, and suspicion itself becomes exhausting. The town learns that answers don't bring relief the way movies promise. They bring weight, a different kind of gravity. Knowing who did it doesn't erase the nights people spent listening for footsteps that never came, or the years parents double-locked doors without knowing why they were so afraid. Resolution explains the fear, but it doesn't refund it. For some, anger arrives late. Anger at how long it took. Anger at how close the truth was the entire time. Anger at themselves for trusting the calm surface of familiarity. It's quieter than rage, more corrosive, settling into routines and resurfacing when least expected, at grocery stores, at school events, at funerals where the wrong face suddenly seems too familiar. Law enforcement replays the early days of the investigation in their minds like damaged film reels. Missed chances. Evidence logged but not understood. Decisions made under pressure that age badly with time. No one speaks publicly about blame, but accountability doesn't need an audience to exist. It lives in private moments, in sleepless nights, in the understanding that perfection was never required, only persistence. The suspect's name, once spoken in whispers, now sounds heavy when said aloud. It doesn't fit easily into sentences. People pause before using it, as if the syllables themselves might contaminate the air. This was someone woven into daily life, someone who borrowed tools, waved at neighbors, blended so thoroughly into the background that no one thought to look twice. That realization cuts deeper than the crime itself. Evil didn't arrive loudly. It didn't announce its presence. It stood in line. It smiled. It waited. Families teach their children lessons they never planned to articulate. Trust but verify. Kindness but awareness. Community but boundaries. Innocence doesn't vanish overnight, but it thins. It becomes conditional. The town doesn't lose its warmth, but adds a filter, an unspoken rule book shaped by experience rather than fear. The victim's story changes tone as well. No longer frozen in mystery, it gains context without losing tragedy. Their life is no longer defined solely by how it ended. People speak their name with intention now, not pity. The focus shifts from what was taken to what existed before it was taken. Laughter remembered, habits recalled, humanity restored. Cold case files elsewhere are reopened because of this one. Not out of optimism, but obligation. Investigators understand now that time is not an excuse. It's a challenge. Evidence waits. Truth waits. And sometimes justice waits longer than anyone should ask it to. The town doesn't celebrate. There are no banners, no speeches. Closure arrives quietly, unevenly, at different speeds for different people. Some accept it, some resist it, some don't recognize it at all. Healing is not synchronized. What remains constant is the awareness that silence is never neutral, that unanswered questions are never harmless, that every unresolved case leaves a shadow not just on victims, but on everyone who lives nearby, carrying the weight of uncertainty without realizing it. This story doesn't end with relief. It ends with clarity. And clarity, once seen, cannot be unseen. Long after the headlines fade, after the news vans leave and the microphones disappear, the case continues to exist in a quieter, more persistent way. It lives in habits, in pauses, in the way people listen more carefully now when someone hesitates mid-sentence. The town doesn't talk about the cold case every day, but it doesn't need to. The awareness is already settled into the infrastructure of daily life. There are moments when the past resurfaces without warning. A familiar street at dusk, a song on the radio that was popular the year everything stopped making sense. Memory doesn't ask permission before it returns. It simply arrives, carrying the weight of everything that was unanswered for so long. The arrest didn't restore what was lost. It rearranged it. Pain didn't vanish. It found a place to sit. Questions didn't evaporate. They changed shape. Instead of who did this, people now ask, how did we miss it? How did it last this long? How many others are still waiting? Those questions echo far beyond the town limits. For investigators, the case becomes a reference point, not a trophy, a warning. It's cited quietly in briefings, in training rooms, in late-night conversations between colleagues who understand how close failure can come to permanence. The lesson is never spoken dramatically. It's understood. Evidence doesn't expire just because attention does. The community learns to live with contradiction. Relief and regret exist side by side. Gratitude for answers shares space with grief for lost time. There is no clean emotional resolution, no single feeling that overrides the others. The complexity is the point. Real life refuses simplicity. The victim's presence remains, not as a ghost, but as a constant reminder of why patience matters. Their name is spoken differently now, not as part of mystery, but as part of truth that survived neglect, indifference, and the slow erosion of years. Remembering them no longer feels like reopening a wound. It feels like honoring endurance. Cold cases teach communities something uncomfortable. Safety is often an assumption, not a guarantee. Familiarity can be camouflage. Silence can be complicity without intent. These lessons don't inspire fear. They inspire vigilance. A sharper awareness of the spaces between people, of the stories that don't quite add up. The town doesn't define itself by the crime anymore. It defines itself by what followed, by the refusal to let uncertainty be the final chapter, by the understanding that justice, when delayed, still matters. Maybe even more. There is no dramatic closing image, no final line that resolves everything, just a sense of continuity, life moving forward, carrying the past without being consumed by it. The case no longer demands attention. It demands memory, because unresolved violence leaves scars. But remembered truth leaves resilience. And in this quiet Texas town, that resilience is what remains. Years later, the story still resists being placed neatly on a shelf. It refuses to become just another file number, another anecdote told at conferences, or condensed into a paragraph in a textbook. It lingers because it altered something fundamental in the way the town understands itself, in the way it understands time. People notice how the calendar feels heavier now. Dates matter. Anniversaries are no longer passive markers. They carry emotional residue. The day the victim disappeared. The day the case went cold. The day the arrest finally came. These aren't just moments in history. They're pressure points. Touch them, and memory responds instantly. Some residents who once planned to leave never did. Others who swore they'd stay eventually moved away, carrying the story with them like an accent that never fully fades. Wherever they go, they talk about a place where the truth took decades to surface, where normal life continued alongside unanswered questions, where certainty was a luxury no one could afford. The courtroom scenes replay in fragments. Not the speeches, not the legal language, but the human details. A tightening jaw, averted eyes, the sound of a chair shifting when a name was spoken. Justice, when it finally arrived, did not thunder. It breathed, slowly, unevenly. The suspect becomes a symbol more than a person, not a monster in the cinematic sense, but something more unsettling. Proof that harm doesn't always wear a mask, that it can exist quietly, patiently, embedded in routine. That realization doesn't produce paranoia. It produces caution, a subtle recalibration of trust. Law enforcement agencies beyond the town quietly adjust their methods. Old evidence rooms are revisited. Forgotten boxes are reopened. The ripple effect is real, even if it's never traced back publicly. This case didn't just resolve one mystery. It challenged the finality of failure elsewhere. The victim's family learns to navigate a strange new reality. For years, they lived with uncertainty. Now they live with knowledge. Neither state is easy. Grief doesn't disappear when answers arrive. It transforms. It becomes sharper in some places, softer in others, but it never fully loosens its grip. What surprises people most is how ordinary life eventually feels again. Not unchanged, but functional. Laughter returns without guilt. Celebrations happen without hesitation. The town proves that survival isn't betrayal. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying memory without letting it dictate every step. Cold cases leave behind a particular kind of wisdom. They teach that time is not an enemy, but it is not an ally either. It's neutral. It preserves and erodes with equal indifference. Only attention, sustained and uncomfortable, tips the balance toward truth. This case no longer asks questions. It answers them quietly, through behavior, through caution, through resolve. And even now, long after the final ruling, long after the last headline, the town understands something it didn't before. Some stories don't end when they're solved. They end when they're understood. And that understanding, once earned, never truly leaves. There comes a point when the case stops being something people think about and starts being something they live with, not consciously, not deliberately. It settles into the background, like a low-frequency hum you only notice when it suddenly disappears. The town reaches that point slowly, without announcement. New generations grow up hearing fragments. Not the full story, never all at once. Just pieces dropped casually in conversation. A reference at the dinner table. A sentence overheard at a barber shop. A warning phrase gently, without details. The past becomes a cautionary undertone rather than a headline. What's striking is how little sensationalism survives. The violence fades first, then the shock. What remains is process, waiting, uncertainty, the emotional cost of not knowing. That's what endures, because it's what people recognize in their own lives. The crime was extraordinary. The endurance was not. Some residents realized they no longer remember the town before the case. The mystery became part of the landscape so early that it shaped their understanding of normal. For them, resolution doesn't feel like closure. It feels like a recalibration of reality, a reminder that something they assumed permanent was, in fact, temporary. There are still unanswered questions, even now, details that never surfaced, motives that remain partially obscured. But these gaps no longer feel threatening. They're accepted as limits rather than failures. The difference is subtle but profound. The need to know everything gives way to the need to know enough. The The town's relationship with law enforcement changes in small, meaningful ways. Less blind trust, less automatic suspicion, more dialogue, more patience. Accountability becomes mutual instead of adversarial. Trust, once fractured, is rebuilt not through promises, but through consistency. In quiet moments, people acknowledge something they once resisted. The case made them more attentive to each other, to inconsistencies, to silence. Awareness didn't arrive through fear. It arrived through experience. And experience, unlike panic, tend to stick. The victim's legacy continues to evolve. No longer frozen in tragedy, it becomes associated with persistence, with a refusal to let time erase significance. Their name doesn't summon dread anymore. It summons resolve. A reminder that absence can still exert pressure on the present. Cold cases are often described as frozen. This one was never frozen. It was dormant, waiting for the conditions to change, waiting for someone to look again. That distinction matters. It reframes failure as delay, and delay as something that can still be challenged. The town doesn't claim victory. It claims responsibility. Responsibility to remember accurately. Responsibility to question conclusions. Responsibility to stay uncomfortable when comfort comes too easily. This story doesn't echo loudly anymore. It resonates quietly, and in that quiet, the lesson holds steady. Truth doesn't require urgency to survive. It requires attention. And attention, once learned, rarely fades. In the end, what lingers isn't the crime, or even the justice that arrived so late it felt almost out of season. What lingers is a recalibration, the subtle, permanent shift in how a place understands itself after learning how easily certainty can be wrong. The town wakes each morning to the same streets, the same storefronts, the same routines. Coffee is poured, doors are unlocked, names are exchanged without hesitation. And yet beneath that normalcy is an awareness that didn't exist before, a knowledge earned through years of unanswered questions. It's not suspicion, it's discernment, a quieter, sharper way of paying attention. People notice details now. Who avoids eye contact when a familiar name comes up? Which stories change slightly with repetition? How silence stretches when it shouldn't? None of this turns neighbors into detectives. It turns them into listeners. And listening, after what this town endured, feels like a form of respect. The case becomes a reference point in moments of doubt. When someone suggests letting an old problem go, there's a pause, a glance, an unspoken memory of what happens when waiting turns into forgetting. The lesson is not dramatic, not loud. It's procedural. Keep looking. Keep asking. Keep records intact. Time doesn't invalidate truth. It only tests commitment. For the family at the center of it all, life settles into a fragile equilibrium, not peace, something sturdier. They learn that grief doesn't demand constant attention to remain real. It can exist quietly, alongside ordinary joys, without diminishing either. Knowing what happened didn't end their pain. It gave it borders. And borders, however painful, are better than endless terrain. The suspect fades from conversation faster than anyone expects. Not because forgiveness arrived, but because fixation no longer serves a purpose. The story doesn't need a villain to stay relevant. It needs accuracy. It needs memory. It needs a discipline to tell it without embellishment, without spectacle, without letting shock overshadow consequence. Cold cases elsewhere continue to surface, each one carrying its own gravity. Some will be solved, some won't. This town doesn't pretend otherwise. It understands now that resolution is not a guarantee. It's a possibility earned through persistence, resources, and the refusal to accept silence as an answer. What changes most is the town's relationship with time. The past is no longer sealed off. The future no longer assumed. Everything feels connected by threads that can stretch, but not break. Actions taken now are understood to echo later, sometimes decades later, when technology catches up or when someone finally decides to look again. There is no monument for this understanding, no plaque, no annual ceremony. It exists in behavior, in record rooms kept orderly, in tips taken seriously, in cases reopened not because they promise headlines, but because they deserve answers. The story does not conclude with satisfaction. It concludes with vigilance. Because this town learned something that can't be unlearned. Silence is not absence. Time is not erasure. And truth, once disturbed, has a way of resurfacing. Patient, unyielding, waiting for someone willing to listen long enough. The cold case is no longer cold, but its echo remains. And that echo is what ensures the story never truly ends. Even now, long after the last official document was signed and archived, the case still exerts a quiet pressure on the town, like a weather system that never fully clears. It's not visible, not dramatic, but it shapes decisions in subtle ways. How people choose their words, how institutions weigh doubt, how quickly assumptions are challenged when they feel too comfortable. The memory of uncertainty has become instructional. It reminds people that the absence of noise does not equal peace. That calm can coexist with unresolved harm. For years, life continued uninterrupted, while a truth sat buried just beneath the surface, waiting. That realization reframes how people interpret quiet moments now. Silence is no longer neutral ground. Teachers reference the case indirectly, not as a lesson in crime, but as a lesson in patience and persistence. Journalists mention it in passing when discussing long investigations that refuse to die. Detectives carry it with them into new interrogations, an unspoken reminder that certainty arrived late once before, and it could arrive late again. The town's archive becomes a place of quiet reverence. Boxes once considered relics are treated with care. Notes written by hands long retired are reread with fresh eyes. There's an understanding now that information ages differently than people do. What seems irrelevant today may become critical tomorrow. Some nights, when the town is especially still, the past feels closer than expected. Not intrusive, just present. The awareness doesn't bring fear. It brings clarity. A sense that every unresolved story leaves behind a responsibility, whether acknowledged or not. That responsibility doesn't disappear when attention fades. It waits. People no longer ask why the case took so long to resolve. They ask what allowed it to survive it all. What small acts of preservation, one piece of evidence stored properly, one name written down, one file not discarded, kept the truth from vanishing completely. Those acts matter more than grand gestures ever could. The victim's story is no longer retold in full. It doesn't need to be. Its influence is embedded in policy, in mindset, in the collective instinct to look twice, to listen longer, to resist the urge to close a file simply because time has passed. Their legacy is procedural, not symbolic, and that may be the most durable kind. Cold cases are often described as failures frozen in time. This one taught a different lesson. It showed that delay is not the same as defeat, that answers can exist long before they're recognized, and that the line between unsolved and solved is often thinner than anyone wants to admit. The town doesn't romanticize the wait. It respects it. It understands now that endurance without attention is meaningless. Only when patience is paired with vigilance does truth stand a chance of returning intact. This story doesn't move forward anymore. It holds its ground, and in doing so, it leaves behind a final understanding that shapes everything that follows. Justice may arrive late, but indifference arrives earlier. And this town has learned, at great cost, never to welcome it again. At some point, the story stopped expanding, not because there is nothing left to say, but because everything that matters has already settled into place. The town reaches that point without realizing it. One day, the case is no longer something being processed. It is something already absorbed. Life continues, but with a faint awareness humming beneath it all. When paperwork is filed, it's done carefully. When a lead feels insignificant, it's still logged. When someone says it's probably nothing, the phrase hangs in the air just long enough to be questioned. The past has trained people not to rush past discomfort. The cold case becomes part of institutional memory, not written in bold letters, not celebrated, but embedded in procedure. A reminder that the difference between permanence and resolution is often just sustained attention. The town no longer assumes the present is complete. It understands that some truths exist out of sequence, waiting for the right moment to align. There's a quiet confidence that grows from this understanding. Not arrogance, not certainty, something steadier, a belief that even if answers don't come quickly, they are worth protecting, worth preserving space for, worth revisiting when circumstances change. The victim's absence no longer defines the town's sorrow. Their presence defines its discipline. Every careful step, every reopened file, every moment of hesitation before dismissal carries a trace of their story, not as tragedy, but as instruction. People stop asking how this could have happened. That question has no productive end. Instead, they ask how to make sure forgetting doesn't happen again, how to recognize the early signs of neglect, how to keep curiosity alive when urgency fades. Cold cases elsewhere still surface, still shock communities that believe time had sealed the past. This town watches those stories differently now, without surprise, with recognition, understanding that unresolved truth doesn't disappear. It waits, quietly, patiently, until someone is willing to disturb it. There is no final emotion attached to this story, no single word that captures what remains. It's not closure. It's not peace. It's not relief. It's readiness. Readiness to look again. Readiness to listen longer. Readiness to accept that justice is not a moment, but a practice. The cold case no longer asks for attention. It has changed how attention works. And in that change, the story finds its true ending, not in an answer, but in a permanent refusal to stop asking.